Donald Trump is now going to be the president come January. He's going to be building his government. But the biggest question over here, how is it going to impact the globe? There are 10 important questions that we have put out for you. Rishabh Gulati, my editor-in-chief, is going to explain to us and let's better understand how this is going to pan out for the globe and the strategic affairs that are linked to United States of America.
All right. So Donald Trump has now won. He's going to become the president of the United States of America for the second time after a gap of 4 years. So what is fundamentally different? What do we need to hold our breath for? The basic first question for the entire globe has to be, will Trump end the war in Ukraine? This is easier said than done. Because remember, Ukrainian lives have been lost. Russian lives have been lost. The question now is, what kind of a face-saver mechanism can be found in order to end the war in Ukraine? He has said he'll do it, but what and how? Does he simply cut support for the Ukrainians and foster a Ukrainian surrender and the Russian takeover of the entire country? Not feasible. Does he let the Russians occupy large parts of the Ukraine? Not feasible. Does he demand of the Russians to simply vacate the Crimea and all the territories that they're occupying? Not easily done. There will have to be some assurance that the Ukrainians will not join NATO, which they haven't been able to do anyway, will not join the EU, which the EU has delayed anyway, to find some sort of exit. But all of this easier said than done. But that's the fundamental first question. The fundamental second question, will Trump cut funding to NATO? Donald Trump, for the past 8 years, has been saying that America spends too much money on NATO, and the European powers, who are all cutting their defense budgets, neither supply enough weaponry, arms, personnel or funding to NATO. So the Americans will cut it. He's done it before. He is expected to do it again, to the point that the NATO Secretary General spoke out that, listen, business will carry on as always. It will, but it also won't. We've already seen France make an appeal to other European countries that we will now have to figure out our destiny on our own. So keep an eye out on that. Will Donald Trump ease sanctions on Russia? You can argue it both ways, that the Russian sanctions either have worked wondrously or have worked not at all. Russia has not been brought to her knees. Has it been affected? For sure, in its dollar trade. You will have to do something on this in order to get the Russians back on the table to deal with the war on Ukraine. So will he do it? Big question hanging in the air. Will Donald Trump restart the tariff wars with China? This was the hallmark of his first presidency. Now the Chinese, incidentally, have undercut this. They have utilized the successor of NAFTA. All the Chinese manufacturers are now shifting to Mexico. Mexico-America trade is shooting up year on year. So a route has been found out, but the tariff wars with China, expect something to happen on this front, and expect thereby something to happen in the revision of the North American Free Trade Agreement and the movement of Chinese company goods through the Mexican border into America. The other big question hanging in the air, will Israel now need a Gaza exit plan? Now you have to understand, here we are a year later, since October 7. Joe Biden was a self-proclaimed, self-confessed Zionist, a strong supporter of Israel. Even though his administration has critiqued some of the policies, some of the issues, and indeed the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, they have not pressurized Israel or been unable to pressurize Israel to exit Gaza. The war, in fact, has expanded to Lebanon, has expanded to attacks on Iran. You can even compute that the Netanyahu administration made a judgment call that if an attack had to take place in Iran, best to take place before the American election results are out. Maybe, just maybe, the timing was in question there. But will Donald Trump, who's been more difficult with Israel during his first presidency, now say, guys, you need to get out of Gaza? But on the other hand, Donald Trump was very, very tough on Iran. So the next big question, of course, is, will he ramp up action against Iran? This was another hallmark feature of his foreign policy during his his first presidency, including the assassination of top Iranian leaders that took place 4 years ago. The other big question hanging in the air as the globe digests the results coming from the world's so far only superpower: will there be tax cuts? And if there will be tax cuts, as we all suspect them, will this be a boost to the American economy, therefore the global economy? All the stock markets are up. Heck, Bitcoin is up on the Trump election. Or will this actually lead to more inflation, because the inflation was caused by all the trillions of dollars pumped into the global economy due to COVID? Big question hanging in the air, and all our fates hang in the balance on this. The other big question for the global community: will oil prices come down? Now, America, we forget, is now energy independent. It produces all the oil and gas it needs for its own consumption. Traditionally, the Republicans are more in favor of the fracking that needs to take place in Alaska to make that happen. But the Democrats under Biden didn't halt it either on environmental concerns. But will Donald Trump be more bullish on the oil and gas industry? Probably. If that happens, can more American oil and gas come into the global markets? Maybe. There can be a strategic move, in fact, to bring in more oil and gas, because as the oil prices decrease, who hurts? The Saudis hurt, but the Iranians and Russians hurt even more. So there might be a chance that oil and gas prices come down. If Ukraine sees a resolution, if the Israelis are exiting Gaza and the global situation seems to stabilize, more oil comes into the market, oil prices might just go down. Will China plus one accelerate? The Americans are pushing a $250 billion plan to bring semiconductor manufacturing back on shore. They want products, including semiconductors, electronics, and other high-end technologies to be built outside of China. So will China plus one accelerate? Probably. Probably. More tariff wars. Can we write off China? No. But is it likely to happen? Yes. It's headed in that direction. The final big question that's hanging in the air, because as we've been obsessed with what's happening in Ukraine, and then have been obsessed with what's happening in West Asia and the Middle East, we've forgotten what the Chinese are doing in the South China Sea. Just last week, they conducted their first dual carrier aircraft carrier exercises. What they're doing in the Philippines, what they're doing with Vietnam, what they're doing with Japan, and what they're doing on Taiwan. Now, there is a mutual defense treaty, but the question is, a Donald Trump who says, no war in my time, will he actually threaten to commit troops to the ground in Taiwan in order to defend that sovereign country? Big question hanging in the air.
Absolutely. Those are some very interesting aspects that are going to be impacted now that Donald Trump has become the president-elect of United States of America. Let's start our conversation. Joining me on the telecast is Ambassador Suresh Goyal. And you know, top of the mind comes the Russia-Ukraine conflict, because that has been the diatribe that has been put forth by Donald Trump time and again, even when he was campaigning. He had met President Zelensky, he had spoken about how war is not the answer, and he's the one who's going to negotiate peace. He's the one who's going to negotiate a ceasefire. How is this going to impact NATO? How is it going to impact the European Union? And what role, and do you think Donald Trump is going to be able to be successful in stopping this war?
Everything will hinge on the American security, American interest, American trade, and the jobs in America. And therefore, if we talk about Ukraine, he has already indicated, in fact, that he doesn't want wars. Now, if you look at Ukraine, how does Ukraine war in any way benefit the USA? I mean, if Trump sees that there is any benefit for the USA in the war, he might think about it. But if he sees there's no benefit in the USA for this war, he may in fact say that, look, guys, this is your war, and I'm out of it. There's nothing for me in the war. Mm-hmm. And that is I don't think Trump is going to pay much attention to the security alliance called NATO. He had given enough indication of that during his first presidency. I don't think he's going to pay much attention to what Zelensky says, because in any case, the war started because of Zelensky's aspirations to join NATO, for the Ukraine to join NATO. Now, will Trump actually be persuaded by these arguments, or he will simply say that, all right, enough is enough, no more further USA involvement, it's your war, you fight it out, you do whatever you want. And if he says that, then does Europe have the capacity or the wherewithal to continue with the war with its own resources? I don't have answer, but I have my doubts in
Yeah.
that matter really. And therefore, I think when Trump says that he will stop the war, it will simply he will stop supporting the war, and that's the end of it. And I think he will do that because I don't see any direct American interest in the war, unlike in the case of the Middle East or in Southeast Asia. Megha.
Okay, all right. Also interesting to note that, when President Zelensky came out and made that congratulatory statement for Donald Trump, he also mentioned about how in the last meeting in September with Donald Trump, when he was campaigning to become the president, they spoke about the quote-unquote victory plan, and they spoke about how the offensive of Russia can be repelled with the continuous effort of US and Ukraine working in cohesion. I'm going to take up the next topic. Joining me on the telecast is also Shekhar and Narasimhan. And Shekhar, we've spoken about the top 10 questions that the world is asking today when Donald Trump has been elected as the president of United States of America. And I am going to talk about the Israel-Gaza conflict and whether there can be an exit plan that can be negotiated by Donald Trump when it comes to the hindrances that have been brought forth in the Abraham Accords and the normalization of ties that Israel was on the verge of completing when the war hit.
So, Megha, it's certainly an interesting day. America has spoken, the voters have spoken, and we are going to have Donald Trump again for the next 4 years. So with that reality, the question after January 20th is, what does it mean when you look at the very large interest that the United States has in the Middle East, which your previous speaker said that very well. He said, I think that Donald Trump's interests, America's interests, merge more in the Middle East than they do necessarily in Eastern Europe. So when you think about that situation, everything that America is doing in both wars, frankly, is funding them. We have more direct engagement in the Middle East. We don't have troops on the ground necessarily in direct combat roles. We do not have direct combat roles, certainly in Ukraine. But if anybody were to actually just pick up the phone today and call Bibi Netanyahu and say, if we don't see progress in these three areas, we're going to do something about the arms funding, that would have the effect that we should have had there with regard to humanitarian assistance in Gaza, with regard to a two-state solution, with regard to the release of the hostages. I think all these things are possible if somebody were to pick up the phone and have that conversation and actually be willing to carry it out. So I do think there's a shift that is possible there today, which may not have been possible prior to the election.
Right, absolutely. And we had reflected this when my editor-in-chief was also speaking about and explaining what are the concerns and doubts in people's mind and what could be the possibilities now in the future in the next 4 years, because Iran and the sanctions that had been imposed by Donald Trump had since been rolled back in the Biden administration. Do you think this is once again a possibility, a probability that Donald Trump is going to revive those sanctions and ramp up action against Iran in a bid to make it more handicapped in being able to fight the war against Israel?
I absolutely think so. I think that either one of them would have done that. I think the difference in approach on Israel and Gaza would have been more stark. But in either case, I would have expected that there would be an enormous amount of pressure on Iran. And it's both because they might be only 6 months away from a nuclear weapon of some sort, which means that time is short to do something. And the second is because of the continued support they are giving to their proxies in the Middle East and potentially any other attacks that occur. There have been reports, very credible reports in the US, of Iranian interference in the US elections. If those even are turned out to be 70% true, or the idea that Iran was actually supporting an assassination attempt on Donald Trump's life, even if that were 20% credible, all I can say is you can expect some significant retaliatory actions. He takes these things very personally. He operates on gut instinct. It would not surprise me to see us move in a much more confrontational role on that, which does have an effect on oil prices and could have other geopolitical effects that you were talking about.
Right, absolutely. Leel Sinai also on the telecast with me. He's a lawyer and is also Jewish leader. Leel, let's understand from you now, how advantageous or disadvantageous would it be for Israel now that Donald Trump is at the position of power in America?
Yes, thank you for having me. Donald Trump has said in the past that he fully supports Israel's war against Hamas in Gaza, but believes that they should win that war, not necessarily just purely end it, but win it as soon as possible. And so there is some urgency, but I think we will see much more of a full green light from the Trump administration for Israel to prosecute its war on Hamas in Gaza. And I also think we'll see that support for Israel in its war on Hezbollah in Lebanon, and there are already steps being taken to drive Lebanon out of drive Hezbollah out of South Lebanon and enforce Resolution 1701. I think as soon as that can come to a conclusion, especially in Gaza with Hamas, we'll see efforts by the Trump administration to push other Arab nations in the region to facilitate a rebuilding of Gaza and not have it be the responsibility purely of Israel, and to ensure a peaceful transition of control in Gaza. And I also think we'll see a push towards similar Abraham Accords style resolutions with countries like Saudi Arabia, which has been waiting in the wings since before October 7th to engage in a treaty of that sort.
Incidentally, the Abraham Accords were negotiated by Donald Trump when he was in power in 2016. Right. So how does this move forward? Keeping in mind, can we see an end to war? How is that going to be negotiated? Will America have to intervene? Does America even have the wherewithal to intervene in the subject, in the matter? And when do these normalization of ties, the negotiations and conversations that were at the brink of being materialized happen again?
Yeah, absolutely. In my personal opinion, I think with the last administration under Biden, there has been an extreme hesitancy to provide the full-throated support that Israel needs to finish the war, and in doing so, it's created a situation in which war has been longer and more protracted than it's needed to be. Take, for example, the administration's push for Israel not to go into Rafah in Gaza. Israel delayed, but eventually did it anyway, and found and killed Sinwar there, along with rescuing many hostages there. And so I think with that kind of support, Israel can finish this war much sooner and focus more of its attention on the head of the snake, which is Iran, which supports all these proxies. And at the same time, we can also push for a situation on the ground where Saudi Arabia feels much more comfortable in engaging with Israel in an Abraham Accords style agreement, and that will have reverberating effects for peaceful relations throughout the Middle East.
Okay. I also have with me Pankaj Vora, executive editor of the Sunday Guardian. Pankaj Vora, let's understand from you, and I'm going to focus on the Taiwan and the aggression that has been shown more recently by China. Do you think after if there is an end to war that Biden is being able to negotiate in East Europe, the resources could then be funneled into Taiwan? Could that be a possibility? Or right now the East China Sea, South China Sea, the Indo-Pacific is not much of a concern that America wants to burden itself with?
Well, there are a lot of concerns which will be there when Donald Trump takes over on 20th of January. As a matter of fact, his first priority would be to first, set the domestic issues right. there are a lot of problems which are within America and which, made voters to vote for him. There is inflation and all those factors which will come into play. Of course, simultaneously, he will be looking at foreign policy issues as well. What needs to be also understood is that, in order to end the conflict, both in Gaza as well as in Ukraine, there could be circumstances which may compel Zelensky to resign. And I think it is also the end of the road of Mr. Netanyahu. And there will be new leadership in both these countries, and which will help in brokering peace. And as previous speakers are saying, that in Ukraine, the thing is that America has been fighting a proxy war using Ukraine as the front, but to test out Russia. But right now, Trump will not like to escalate the costs, and he's more of a businessman in his approach. He will see what the war brings to America and whether it has been profitable or has caused huge losses. So his approach would be similar. Mr. Netanyahu has been able to ramrod or pressurize the American leadership, but Trump has a very overbearing personality. He's not the one who's going to be cowed down by anybody. So, and as it is, many people who have been closely watching Israeli politics are also of the view that once the war ends there, it'll be end of the road for Netanyahu.
Okay.
So far as China is concerned, Taiwan is concerned, that has always been there, even during Trump's first presidency and during presidencies of various presidents over the last so many years, ever since, the Second World War got over. So America is committed to protect Taiwan, and Trump is a very strong, determined leader. And, Chinese also know that they cannot fool around with him. So the approach would be, they would be, taking into account his personality and his approach while, trying to be adventurous in these areas.
Okay.
So Trump's coming out there is perhaps good for the world and good for the world peace. And I think it will, how long it will take, but he's going to, these wars which are taking place, whether in West Asia or in Ukraine, are certainly going to come to an end. And leaders, both in Ukraine and in Israel, may, there may be a change of leadership.
Okay, that's an interesting analysis. Also on the channel with me right now is Daniel Wagner. He is the banker and financial expert. Daniel, talking about the economy and tax cuts are something that have been advocated by Donald Trump during his campaigns as well. How is that going to impact the American economy and as a byproduct, and in turn impacting the global economy? Is that going to bring about a boost?
As an American, I am absolutely astonished that more than half of the population of my country has re-elected a convicted felon and the king of outrageous and unacceptable behavior to this position again. I fear for my country and I fear for the world. The problem is that we're having an untethered Trump in round 2.0, whether it's domestic or international affairs. And he has all the subtlety of a Mack truck. And as a result, we're going to see a lot of pushback on the global stage from what he would like to be able to do. And we're also going to see some pushback in America in terms of what impact it's going to have on domestic politics. As far as the economy goes, well, all the stock markets in the world are up today because they're anticipating that good things are going to happen for business as a result of what Trump is likely to do. But they're not taking into account some of the likely side effects of his economic policies. First and foremost being the idea that tariffs are going to be the answer to America's economic travails. They are not. They are going to cost the American consumer greatly, and they are going to result in a lot of counter-retaliatory tariffs, which is going to raise the price for everything and severely cripple aspects of the global economy, which will, of course, have an impact on the American economy. As far as the global arena is concerned, I disagree with some of the things that a number of your speakers have said. I don't think that people like Zelensky and Netanyahu are going to disappear from the scene. I think they are going to, not Zelensky, but Netanyahu is going to become stronger. He is basically going to get a green light to do whatever he feels is necessary vis-a-vis Iran. As far as Ukraine is concerned, Zelensky's not going anywhere. NATO is going to step up to the plate. And the speaker who said that he didn't think that America had any real interest in Ukraine, I think is incorrect. America certainly has an interest in a strong Europe and in containing an expansionist and aggressive Russia. And so the question in my mind is, what is Trump thinking he's going to be able to do to end this conflict?
Okay.
If he wants to give Ukraine away on a platter, that's not going to work with Europe nor with Ukraine. As far as Iran is concerned, well, I think that we should expect a significant increase in aggressive behavior on both sides with Israel and Iran in the near term. And it's quite likely in my mind that Mr. Netanyahu will attack some of Iran's critical infrastructure, their oil fields, and very likely their nuclear facilities in the near future.
That's an interesting perspective. But talking about particularly when you speak about the Ukraine-Russia war and how is it going to be ended by Donald Trump, do you think now that he is in a position to act on the number of policies that he has been projecting, he has been promising that NATO will not be getting the financial aid that has been doled out by America for several months and years now in fighting the Ukraine war as well? There has been military support that has been given to Ukraine and Trump has been against it. Do you think Ukraine will be able to wage the war that it has been waging against Russia for all these years without America's support?
It will only be able to do so if the Europeans step up with funding that America may withdraw. And Trump has made it clear that he won't be continuing funding for Ukraine to the extent that he alone has the power to decide that. So Europe has a decision to make. NATO has a decision to make. Mm-hmm. And that is, to what extent will they increase their funding and to what extent will that be sufficient to make up for the difference? This is coming, of course, at a time when Mr. Putin is becoming even more aggressive on the battlefield and is using those North Korean soldiers. And I think we're going to see a turning point in the Ukraine war pretty soon. But if Trump imagines that he's going to solve this problem in a day, I think he's just in cloud cuckoo land. I don't see how that's even remotely possible.
Okay, all right. Those are interesting perspectives. I thank all of you for joining me on the telecast.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.